Hello, welcome to Inside Music Curation. It is Wednesday, it's 1 o'clock here in the Pacific time zone. We are the team at Feed Media Group, and I've got my esteemed colleagues, members of our curation team, Arturo. Good to see you today, Arturo.
Hello.
Dario, Juan, and Stens. I'm Melissa. We're going to talk today about BPM. What's in a beat? What does it mean? At Feed Media Group, we spend a lot of our time curating music for digital fitness and fitness clients through our Feed FM platform. So these guys are thinking about beats and rhythms and intensity all day long. But I think, some folks approach BPM differently. So that's what we're going to dive in today. I think, the first question I'll throw out is, when does BPM first come into the conversation? When you guys are working with new partners, new clients, when does the BPM topic come into the conversation?
I'd say right away. I think, especially for fitness, when they think music, they think BPM, which I honestly think is a bit of a misnomer. Every song has a BPM, right? Unless it's doesn't have a tempo at all. If it's some sort of ambient track that has zero pulse, right? And it's a number, right? It's quantifiable. It's very closely attached to a song. It has beats per minute. That's simple. But I think more often than not, even when they're using the word BPM, what most people are referring to are the cadence, the tempo, and the intensity. That's really, really what's important. And those things should come right away, right? Depending on the kind of workout you're doing and how you're doing it, both of those are really critical. I think BPM is sort of secondary in that nature. So it gets a little pushed to the forefront. Everyone's BPM, but it's really, really cadence and intensity. And those things, although closely tied to BPM, aren't intrinsically the same thing. And I think that's really the important thing to understand about it is that's really important. And cadence is something that is something people should talk about if it's important to the workout, right? And so if we're talking about cycling, rowing, that cadence is really important, right? Like making sure you're hitting that rhythm, falling into that line, it's also critical that you're not also talking about RPMs or any heart rates or those sorts of things, because those are also BPM and heart rate aren't this right. They're never going to be like the same thing. They're BPMs that your heart should not be beating at, for music that is good for working out. But I think those are important things. So if cadence is important to the type of workout you're doing, then that's important. Then you can start to think about the intensity, right? I need something that has this cadence, but is easy, is light, right? I need something that is this same cadence, but that isn't, is hard, powerful, right? Those are how those things are attached. And then BPM is a way of quantifying that, right? But if you're lifting weights, or doing something else where the cadence is not as important, then I think keeping BPM in your mind is sort of detrimental in that sense.
So yeah, I'd love to hear what what are the different types of workouts where BPM comes into question most commonly?
I was gonna add to what Dario said that BPMs are important for rhythm-based classes. Like rowing, walking, cycling. That you really need a constant beat that and that's the cadence you need. But a lot of people, that there's a misconception about higher BPMs means more intensity, which that is not true. So, for instance, if you want to do some workouts that requires that cadence, to keep you on track, and like you want to have your pace, while you're cycling or rowing to a certain beat, that's important. But in terms of intensity, it doesn't mean that higher BPM rate will be more intense. As a matter of fact, a lot of the some of the I read some blogs about some of the instructors from the companies that we work with, and for instance, for like lifting classes or for like you're doing body weights, and it's more important, like the slower tempo, like or like going into like a sort of a spin class, going up the hill. So they feel that slower tempo music helps you achieve those goals. In this case, they use more hip hop than pop music. That is more used in cases where you need like a constant BPM. And the other thing that that we discuss internally is the fact that sometimes music that has a higher BPM, not all the time means that it's going to be like more intense. And that, because we found the intensity has to do with the also with the rhythms, with how the song has been composed, and it has like could be like a lower tempo song, but it has like the feel of an anthem. That's like invigorating. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that people tend to believe, right?
Well, that's what I would say is, right, like, this is something that is also, each genre has its own spectrum of BPMs and then intensities across those BPMs, and they're all different. And so it's not something you can ascribe to pop, to hip hop, to country, to rock. They sort of exist across that spectrum in that sense. And I think BPM, it just really is only one dimension of the whole picture, right? When you think about tempo, and particularly in classical music and other things, a tempo marking tells you more than just the speed at which to play it, right? It's the characteristic, right? Vivace and Dante, right? Like, those don't just mean fast or slow, right? There's it could be smooth, right? It could be quick but light, right? Like, those are things that a number just doesn't. Quarter note at 132 BPM doesn't tell you any of those things, right? Is it something that's light and quick and moving and bubbly, or is it something that's heavy with strong emphasis at certain, in certain beats? And that's something that is also, like I was saying, particular to different genres. And so 140 BPM is not equal for all genres. Neither is 100, and etc.
Yeah. To add on to that, and also to Arturo's point, when I first started working here, I actually was put in charge of essentially revamping the hip hop and rock stations for our pre-curated stations. And one of the things that we saw there was that, yes, the BPM definitely didn't allow for, a direct, like, standard BPM throughout that genre. So we really had to focus on rhythm and feel. Things that you kind of discover, especially in hip hop, trap within, like, the 140 range, 150 range, actually super upbeat, but not in like an anaerobic like workout, like more like cycling. Actually fits more into like jogging or like more of an aerobic workout. Also with rock and roll as well. Rock has so many different, I guess, subgenres within the genre, right? And all of those subgenres, they actually utilize tempo, BPM so differently. You could be listening to something like Animal Collective at like 140 BPM, and then you could also be listening to Anthrax at 140 BPM. Completely different intensities. But that being said, that's what makes understanding BPM and rhythm in order to be able to curate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, we talk a lot about, at Feed Media Group, the human element of curation, right? Like, you all are professional music curators. So it's not as simple as setting an algorithm and saying, hey, I'm going to do a spin class and I'm going to pick, pop music at 140 BPM and be rearing to go. You guys are taking all of this context. What is going on within the genre? What are happening within the trends within the genre, this decade, or whether it's a throwback station? It's so much more, I think, Dario, you were the one that said earlier that momentum and speed are not exclusive, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
BPM and intensity are not necessarily the same things.
Yeah, and I think that something that I think really highlights that too is people may, without knowing it, in the past, in the way that fitness, especially in brick and mortar locations, was set up, is oftentimes you would pick the song for the intensity and the sort of feel, and then have a DJ make a mix at a certain BPM. So they would bump it up or slow it down, And so when you're working in that sort of modality, the BPM is less important and the feel of the song is more important, And then when you're not having someone change those mixes, you have to take that into consideration when you think about the songs that you're picking and when and how you're picking them, which then obviously, yeah, if you extrapolate that out to not just finding one or two songs that are good for a Tabata section in a spin class, but I need 100 of these that fit this exact, sort of niche, it becomes a lot harder. And when you have to remember that this is music that wasn't made specifically for this functionality. You're sort of repurposing it. It's the music industry, and I think we've talked about this on several occasions, is not geared towards making functional music for fitness. And so unless you're altering it in some way, you need to work with what you have. And some genres obviously fit that better, which is beyond it just being popular. Pop fits into that, right? Country is one that is really hard to find for, doing a country spin class. You can only do a certain kind of spin class, right? You can't just do your regular spin class to country.
So we were talking about, BPM and tempo as it applies to different genres. And Stens, I know you've talked in the past about, your personal experience as a curator and how you approach it in your curation based on your training and experiences as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things, well, first of all, to acknowledge the great comment that came through that anger is an emotion or something to that effect. John Lydon, the famous, Sex Pistols musician. Absolutely, that's what we're talking about right now is feel, the feel of the music, which some of the elements that define it, that BPM is one of those criteria. Another is the intensity, which you can, judge in terms of the thickness of the texture or the quality of the instrumentation. Does it sound more aggressive? Does it sound more, soothing? But yeah, I think, when I approach my curation, first and foremost, I'm thinking as a classically trained musician. And so BPM comes to me kind of naturally because I'm thinking a little bit of how do I notate this? And sometimes that's really helpful because I can tell, oh, this is a 4/4 song, great. And I can tell the tempo is 120, I can use it. Sometimes it's less helpful because I'm hearing a trap style, hip hop song or another one, which has a double time feel that's built into it where you can legitimately feel it as boom, 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 or boom, 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 boom. And it's subjective. And then, it's really important to sit back and be like, okay, this 140/70 BPM song, does this feel based on all of those other dimensions of the music? Does it feel to me more energizing or does it feel to me more relaxing? And so you can break that down musicologically of instrumentation or the vocals or the flow of the rapper or things like that, or you can just go on a gut level. And so, sometimes having that, how do I notate this thing, can be helpful, sometimes not. Notationally, I think when I hear occasionally a triple meter song where it's like dun 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 dun, as opposed to just dun 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 dun, it sticks out pretty easily. I'm like, okay, it's triple meter. That is rarely going to play well in a fitness context because the pulsation of it is so kind of misaligned with what the typical thing is, especially for anything with cadence that I like to work out to anything, honestly. So I'll throw it in my mix. But for a cycling class or something, I'm like, oh, that's a sweet song. Like might be, a huge pop hit. I can't recall which pop artist had a couple big hits in the last couple of years that were in triple meter and I loved them. I think it might've been Selena Gomez. I'm not sure, but I can't use it for fitness, unfortunately, and that's where we sometimes have to wait for the remix or just say, that's a great piece, but contextually it's not appropriate.
I think that's a big thing that happens a lot. A lot of fitness remixes are things that are in triple meter where they throw a solid 4/4 kick over it to like make it functional, or they stretch it and make it into sort of a duple meter. I feel like that happens. That's like the quintessential. The two things that a fitness remix is doing are laying down that solid, sort of rhythmic structure, the meter, or changing the BPM, right? Like that's why you always see fitness compilations, 130 BPM fitness, like because they're changing everything to fall into that sort of space and in that sort of paradigm that it doesn't fall in naturally for the music. And so if you're trying to curate the music in situ, like as it exists, you're limited in what you can really do in those ways.
But I think still the BPMs are important to give context, and with where you mentioned those compilations, because there's I guess as a user, you want to have some sort of baseline of what are you going to work
well
on.
Yeah, well I mean, not everyone's a musician and everyone can like tap tempo out something, right? And yeah, if you get a compilation and it's just all over the place and you've got to guess, right, like what the BPM is. I mean, we luckily have a tool that calculates the BPM for us, and averages it out if there's some discrepancies and other things. But if you're just getting a bunch of music, I mean, Spotify doesn't tell you, oh yeah, this song is at 122 BPM, by the way, and so you're kind of flying blind in that sense, and which makes it harder if you're like, oh, I really like this song for this section of my workout. How do you then know which other song is also at that same BPM to fit it in, unless you have some marker? If I used it from this 130 BPM compilation, then I know I need to swap in another 130 BPM song.
So for the layperson, if I can just add, because we're talking about a lot of different criteria and it quickly gets to be pretty intricate, right? Even for curators, we can kind of nerd out on this. So as a layperson that might be watching this, like, what does it mean? I'd say if you can feel a clear pulsation, and to you it's pretty clear, like dun 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 dun. Okay, that's intuitive. I can feel that. And you want to do a cadence-based workout, use that as your anchor. What we sometimes call 4 on the floor, where you can feel that with every beat. If you can't feel that in a kind of intuitive way, then either maybe don't use it for something that's cadence focused, like cycling or running, or just go with your gut. With this track, I can't exactly find the beat. I'm not going to worry about it. It feels more intense to me, or it feels less intense. So I'm going to put it respectively in, a lifting class versus a, vinyasa style yoga class.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Yeah,
I mean, that happens to go for it.
Dario. Oh, well, there's this essence of essentially, listening to all of you guys, BPM is really only one layer of the onion, correct? So if we're looking at the full onion, we're looking at, instrumentation, the rhythm, the tempo, all of it. So when, you're creating a station that necessarily has, maybe a certain range of BPM, you still need that onion. It's not, you can't throw the onion away just because that BPM just suddenly appears. Because that BPM appears, it just tells you, okay, you need to look through the onion to find if that onion will fit with the rest of these onions, or does it need to leave?
That's amazing.
A number of times to build up on Juan's. It's exactly the same. Look at a station. Look at the requirements. This should, 120 to 130. But that doesn't mean that all those songs, are going to work out well, with the type of exercise that I'm curating for, right? So that's why you need to have in mind, as you say, the entire onion, like and not just pick one of the layers, because then you will probably not have a really good experience if you're only looking at that number.
Well, I think
if you're building glass onion, and you could just completely, it's easy to see through it. Sorry, go on, Dario.
No, it's all right. I think that's the important thing to think about too. If you're building a workout, right? Like, it's like thinking about that way. Like, okay, for this segment of my workout, what's important, right? Is it the tempo? Is it the intensity? And then keep those numbers and that sort of feel in mind, and then not get it too attached to a certain song or other song and trying to wedge it in, right? Because that's not going to work. With BPM, it's easy. Okay, I want something that's 130 BPM, and this song's 125, so it doesn't work. But I think sometimes people get too attached to, oh, my segment's 130 and the song's 130, great. And then they forget to also think about, but is it the right intensity? And does it fit for all these other reasons? And is that important? Because if it's not, then fine, that's great. Any 130 song can slot in. But if it is, then keeping that in mind, as opposed to latching onto a song that may also be an anomaly, right? Like, it may be a song that really only exists in and of itself at that BPM and intensity. you know. And I think when you're making workouts, thinking about what's important for the workout and for the segment, and then keeping those in mind and not getting too attached to a specific combination if it doesn't work. I think that's a good way to not put yourself into a box, right? Because I feel like sometimes as an instructor or, you know, running fitness, you get put into a box with a certain segment where only one song works and it becomes your song that only works for that segment, which obviously from a licensing perspective now becomes a problem. And for a class, if it's always the same song, it becomes dull. And so you want to open yourself up to that flexibility, and using more criteria beyond just the number is so helpful in doing that.
But I would imagine that knowing that song and bringing that to a professional curator like you, does that help you set the tone when you're working with your customers and they say, all right, you know, here's the song that I've used in the past for this section. Are you able to, you know, what questions are you asking them to find out what about that song made it work?
Yeah, I mean, so right, BPM is something I don't need to ask, right? Like that's a number that exists outside of that.
Right.
But the intensity, the feel, those are things that I can ascertain, but they can also tell me about. But again, sometimes those things, it's sort of like a percentage, right? You know, and we have a heat map for these things for different genres and stuff that, you know, if someone brings me a country song that's 115 BPM and is super high intensity, I'm gonna go, look, there's not a lot of other country songs that fall in this category. It's a shallow well that's not going to, right, as opposed to, you know, dance songs at 120 BPM. I could just give you keep shoveling those at you all day long,
Right.
you know, at various different intensities and other things. They're everywhere. They're a dime a dozen, you know, they kind of come and go, you know. But if someone's latched onto, but it has to be country, and I think Arturo has a lot of experience with this, then I can say, look, but here's this bucket down here at this a lower BPM that gets the intensity that you want, if that's what's important. And if this BPM is important, then you're gonna have to broaden outside of country, maybe think about rock, right? Other things that'll sort of attack at that number.
Yeah. And I think, you know, we're obviously talking about BPM specifically today, tempo, beats, intensity, cadence, but always keep in mind, you know, the context, right? And, you know, we published a white paper earlier this year by Dr. Kostas Karagorgis, and context is key. You know, having positive, motivational, uplifting words can really, you know, have a positive effect on your workout. So something to consider as well.
Yeah. And you know, what Dario was saying, I think, you know, we have to, you know, also educate our partners in that sense, you know, in terms of like, you know, I want a country station that is going to have, you know, this high BPM rate when most of the most powerful in terms of intensity country songs are in the lower range. We need to communicate that to the client. Or I remember one time there was a request to create a station for pop remixes from 140 to 160. So it's like, I'm going to find maybe like a handful of songs in that range. And also the fact that it's so high up in BPMs, to me, it means, you know, that I get distracted, you know, that is also a component, you know, like, so that's why educating, you know, the people that our stakeholders, you know, about the intensity, cadence, tempo, and BPMs, it's all part of, you know, the same onion. We're going to call it the onion now, you know, all those are layers of this.
Yeah, you got to find that. You want it to be a sweet onion, right? You want to find that.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't want it to be too fast. You don't want people, you know, pushing too hard. You want to find that sweet spot, that zone.
Right. I think, you know, absolutely, you're right, Arturo, is that there's a Goldilocks-ness to this that we're talking about, right? And it's not a perfectly defined sweet spot, but there is this not too hot, not too cold. And I think, to Melissa's point, we've done a lot of research and thinking about this, and we had actually the foremost researcher in the world that researches the intersection of music and fitness, Dr. Carlos Karageorgis, just wrote a white paper for us that was the ABCs of fitness and music. You know, A is affect. You know, how does it feel? B is behavior. How does it, you know, direct you physiologically? And C, what Melissa was just mentioning, is cognition. And how does it make you think, which is more of a lyrical function. Like if you play a Rocky song, then it's like, oh, I'm in the zone of Rocky now. Or Lose Yourself, I'm in the zone of Eminem fighting it out. So, you know, there's a lot to this, to finding this sweet spot, and BPM is a factor. And PS, if you're curious about that white paper and 20 plus years of research that's just been summarized into like a 5-page thing, it's well worth seeking out on our website.
Yeah, it's on Feed FM. And again, his name is Professor Kostas Karagorgis. It's a great white paper. So check it out at Feed FM, feed.fm. All right. So we're getting close on time. I just want to run through, putting it all in a nutshell. If you're thinking about, curating music specifically for fitness, and you're wondering about BPM, you're wondering about intensity, start at cadence, right? Like, is there a cadence to what you're doing? Is this dance? Is this elliptical, treadmill, rowing? Is there a clear cadence, or is it, asynchronous, which we call, right? Like weightlifting. And just understand that BPM, is a number, tempo is a feeling. So, depending on what you're working with, is it all about the number? Is it all about that cadence, or are you really looking for a feeling to kind of help motivate? And then just to, close it up, do you guys want to go around any last words, bits of advice for folks that might be setting off to put together a station for their own workout?
Remixes are great for hip hop. It's been a trend for a very long time. It's nothing new. But the fact that Megan Thee Stallion's Savage has a remix, and I could put it into like pop stations, and it doesn't necessarily just have to stay in hip hop, I think is exceptional. I think it's great. It's a great remix too, because I think they just like bumped it up maybe like 10 BPMs, but then like it just opens it up to like a whole different style of just like working out.
I think my recommendation is to think about the type of workout first, right? And then from there, to build up your playlist. Considering maybe like the warm up time, the actual exercising time, and then the cool down time if you're doing this at home as well. I think again, BPM is just a number. But the feel and the tempo and the intensity is, also like very important aspects to consider when curating for a specific workout.
Yeah. I mean, I think, the way I look at it is that every song is its own unique snowflake, right? And if I have a song at halfway through a workout and I have to change that song, I need to change that segment of the workout. I can't expect to find the exact same thing, right? Like, they're not just bolts or sockets that you can just interchange in that way. Even if you find something that's the same BPM, intensity it's not something that is written in stone, right? You can look at dynamics and volume and other things, but there's still a sort of intangible aspect to it, and swapping them out, even if they have the same metrics, is going to be different, right? Because all the layers we just talked about are different, and that's okay. But I think being okay with that change, right, is if I change these two things out, right, if I change the flour I'm using and when I'm baking, it inherently is just going to change what it is, which is fine. But I just being aware and being okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, just unless you're actually running a professional cycling class or something that's very RPM centric, where it needs to be on a very defined, specified BPM, go with your gut, choose the onions that appeal to you. I mean, my main fitness outlet is I go in the real world on cycling. I go over and back from the Golden Gate Bridge, and I have my own playlist, and everything in there, even though I'm, pedaling, in a normal cadence, it's all just the onions that I like that get me fired up to work out. So, I mean, really, you can't go wrong with that. Which actually implies the fact too of know your end user, because one person's 9 Inch Nails is going to be another person's Miley Cyrus, or maybe Miley Cyrus's remix of 9 Inch Nails. But, you got to kind of know what's the vibe a person wants when they're working out. Is it angry and aggressive, or is it cheerful and like happy and upbeat?
Yeah, right on. Well, if you want to know more about music curation, subscribe on YouTube, follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook, and please check out feedmediagroup.com for more information. We love sharing these tidbits of music curation with you. If you would love some help from these pros here, feedmediagroup.com will get you to the right spot. We'd love to work with you to curate the right music for your fitness app or your business. Thanks, you guys. Thanks for sharing your expertise.
the white paper from Dr.
Yeah, I'll drop the white paper in the comments so you can check it out there. I'll drop a link in the comments.
Really good.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Melissa.